You've been listening to a CBS News special report out of Kenosha, Wisconsin, where a jury has found 18-year-old Kyle Rittenhouse not guilty on all charges. Rittenhouse was charged with killing 2 men and wounding a third during a protest in Kenosha back in 2020 over the police shooting of Jacob Blake. Rittenhouse claimed self-defense, saying he went to the rally to protect businesses from looters and was attacked by the people he shot. The prosecution argued he went to Kenosha, where he did not live, looking for trouble and is responsible for putting himself in those positions. It took jurors 4 days of deliberation to come back with this verdict. Joining us now is CBS News legal contributor and former Manhattan prosecutor Rebecca Roiphe and Jessica Levinson. She is a CBS News legal contributor and professor at Loyola Law School. Welcome to both of you. Jessica, let me start with you. Why do you think the jury came to the verdict it did?
Well, I think part of what you said in the introduction, which is, to paraphrase, this is really about which story the jury believed. Do they believe that this is a story of a white supremacist who goes across state lines with a semi-automatic weapon and knows exactly what could happen and sets all of these events in motion? Or is this a story of a young man who really wants to help protect property, who goes into the situation, it's volatile, he finds himself in a place, he doesn't precipitate it, but he finds himself in a place where he has no other options, and therefore his actions fall squarely within the self-defense laws in Wisconsin. We know which story the jury believed. It was door number 2.
And yet they did deliberate for a while, which meant they did have questions. And Rebecca, prosecutors appeared to have some pretty strong closing arguments. They painted Rittenhouse as an active shooter, so other people in the crowd had to sort of attack him after the first shooting, or had to sort of be proactive because they were worried he had a disregard for human life. Rittenhouse's attorneys say that the Illinois teenager was there to protect people's property and had to save his own life. So where do you believe that prosecutors fell short in making their argument stick with the jury?
You know, I think the prosecutor did a good job of appealing more broadly to those who had formed opinions about this case. But when it came down to the facts and the law, I think the defense had the case. And normally what you see, especially given the burden of proof in a case like this, is the prosecution honing in on specific facts instead of trying to paint a broader picture. I mean, obviously they do that too. But here I think the defense had a better case based on the specific facts that were surrounding this event. So 2 things can be possible at the same time, and I think the jury ultimately could have believed those 2 things. One is he never should have been there. Kyle Rittenhouse should never have been in Kenosha. He shouldn't have been carrying a gun. He did not know what he was doing, and he created, in some broader sense, a very bad situation. But he also acted in self-defense because there were a bunch of people who were in the moment charging at him, trying to grab his gun. And so to me, while I agree with Jessica that it was these 2 narratives and the jury bought one of them, I also think that the defense built its narrative around the surrounding facts immediately going on, and the prosecution was trying to draw on a broader picture that might have appealed to some, but really did not work as well when it came right down to the law.
So, though, when it comes to the law, I guess, Jessica, my question to you is, how might this case resonate? Because you could take it and extrapolate, well, if anyone who's a little trigger happy goes out with a gun and, decides to, and I'm not saying that this is the situation with Rittenhouse, I'm just extrapolating, and puts themselves in the situation where they can say that, it was self-defense, I had to defend myself, they just happened to have a gun. Isn't that going to make these situations going forward a lot murkier?
So maybe not. And I want to say I agree with everything that Rebecca said. And I think that in this case, the prosecution, again, trying to tell a much broader story that obviously the jury didn't latch onto here. The defense saying, okay, but once these things happen, and this is where I'm going to kind of back into your question. Once these things happen, once he was in a situation where somebody is banging his head with a skateboard, chasing him, throwing a paper bag at him, screaming at him, I'm going to kill you or I'm going to hurt you, then there's no choice. So in so many ways, though, yes, the case comes down to those specific facts, but your question is so important, which is this case was asked to bear the weight of so much more, of such a broader context. That's why we're talking about it. That's why it gains so much attention. So what does this mean going forward? I know people will take from this, well, this means anybody like Rittenhouse can, become a white vigilante and go into a situation, do exactly the same thing. I would say only if the facts are the same, right? This is to Rebecca's point, which is only if the facts would indicate that you can find the behavior to satisfy the self-defense law in that state. And that's where I think we need to be careful not to draw too many broad conclusions about what this means for how we act as a society or what it incentivizes or the broader consequences that it will provide.
Right, but a fight between two people is never a fair fight when one person has a gun, right? So, Jessica, what key points do you think help drive the defense's arguments home?
So I think the defense was helped by all of the video evidence. There weren't actually a lot of facts that were in question here. I mean, there was so much video evidence, and it helped both sides a little bit. What else helped the defense? We just heard Ricky before talking about, I think, Rittenhouse's testimony. I think he held up really well on the stand. And I wasn't, of course, able to see the jury's faces, but I think that he was able to indicate to them that maybe, and this is to Rebecca's point, maybe he shouldn't have been there in the first place. I think we can all agree on that, or I can at least. But that once he was there, that snapshot of when he used deadly force, he had no other choice. And that's where I think the defense really was able to prove their point to the jury. So,
Rebecca, what is next? Can we expect more legal action, like civil cases from the families of the men who were killed? And also, I guess the illegal gun charge was dropped. So does that mean Rittenhouse is entirely off the hook?
Potentially. I mean, you could see civil claims, but, again, this verdict does not make that impossible, but it makes it harder. I think this is a terrible tragedy, and we can all agree to that. And I think that, one of the things that I think both Jessica and I have been emphasizing here is that the criminal justice system cannot always bear the burden of all of our social problems, and sometimes things need to be fixed, and they can't be fixed through the criminal justice system. So what do we need to do in this country about guns? What do we need to do about youth education? I mean, there are so many issues that surround this case that could not enter the criminal courtroom because we have rules of evidence and we have a burden of proof and we have protections for somebody being charged with a criminal case. And the biggest protection is the prosecution has to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. So again, here, this is not a verdict that Kyle Rittenhouse did the perfect thing or was somehow good or that other people should go out and do this. Absolutely not. It is merely the criminal justice system taking its one little corner of this and leaving the rest to, all the rest of these social problems to all different people to try to address.
All right. Well, Rebecca, Roiphe, and Jessica Levinson, thank you so much for your insight. We appreciate it as always. Nancy Chen is joining me now from the courthouse in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Hi, Nancy. So what kind of reaction are you seeing there, in the town outside the courthouse to this verdict?
Absolutely. Good afternoon and good to be with you. There's been a growing crowd of protesters, the largest crowd that we have seen so far during this trial. The people who are out here, both supporters for and those against Kyle Rittenhouse, gathering as we speak. But supporters for Rittenhouse cheered when that verdict came down, that Rittenhouse was found not guilty, breaking out into cheers as well as horns. Car horns were honking as they celebrated that verdict of not guilty on all counts. Rittenhouse facing 5 counts, including the most serious of first-degree intentional homicide, which would have meant a mandatory sentence of life in prison. Instead, Rittenhouse will be free. He has been free. He's been out on bond during this trial, but he has been acquitted, and he will soon be leaving the courthouse here in Kenosha.
And we know, of course, Nancy, that the city of Kenosha was preparing for protests in the wake of this verdict. There have been crowds, as you said, gathered all week. Where are the crowds heading next? And are you seeing any signs that some of that security or law enforcement is needed?
At this point, leading up to today, things have been relatively quiet. There have been a few incidents, and there have been schools in this immediate area that have moved classes to online learning in order to keep students away from this area. But relatively speaking, businesses and those who live around here were keeping a close eye on what was happening. That being said, at the time, we did not see any businesses boarding up or preparing. But of course, those 500 National Guard troops were standing by outside of the city. Now, as of right now, it seems there is that crowd that has been growing outside. Things have seemed relatively peaceful so far. Of course, this happening just 20 minutes ago, so it's something that law enforcement will certainly keep a close eye on it. I spoke with the sheriff of Kenosha County yesterday, and he said that while they were prepared and they were keeping a close eye on things, there was no imminent danger that he felt that they needed to be on extra security level for, but they did add extra security around the courthouse.
All right, Nancy Chen in Kenosha, thank you so much.
Thank you.